Welcome to the Half Geek Half Human podcast, where we explore the intersections of technology, business, and life. This podcast is powered by Atiba, a custom software and IT services company in Nashville, Tennessee. Now to your hosts, Anna Kate Ross and Joey Baggett.
Hi, everyone. On our show today, we'll be discussing the path from junior to senior in tech, what it takes, changes in mindset, and other reflections from two of our developers. Joining us is Caleb Scholze, a senior developer and a team lead here over our mobile team. Caleb is a graduate of the Nashville Software School. We also have Greg Matsick, another senior developer with experience from Fortune 500 firms to smaller shops. Greg has a bachelor's in computer science and is a team member on Caleb's team. Hey, guys, welcome to the show.
Hey, Anna Kate, thanks for having us.
Awesome. Well, we're glad to have you here. We did in our first season a episode with some of the women at Atiba, which was really fun. So this is only aside from the one with JJ, the founder. I guess we did do that one with him, but aside from that, you guys are just our next step of internal Atiba employees to have on the podcast. We're really glad to have you today.
Glad to be here.
So we wanted to talk about this kind of concept of going from a junior to senior and what that looks like. And so obviously you both work in technology, you're developers. That's one path. But I think for anyone listening, it's also just an interesting kind of career trajectory and journey to hear what people's kind of backgrounds and story is. So just to start off, how long, let's start with you, Greg. Tell us, how long have you been at Atiba?
So I just had my year anniversary here.
Just 1 year. Okay. And you're on the mobile team with Caleb, right?
Yep.
And Caleb, how long have you been at Atiba?
So I will be coming up on 7 years in June.
Okay. Exciting. So humans are storytellers at heart, right? So stories are so interesting for all of us. I love hearing any kind of origin story, really. And I thought we could start out by just kind of talking about how you guys got into development. And we've talked a little bit about this already. Interestingly, you both started in electrical engineering, which I think is pretty interesting. Greg, let's start with you. Kind of tell us how you wound your way around to get to where you are now.
Sure. So, so programming has always been a passion or a hobby. Started doing it in high school, actually, writing little programs on graphing calculators to do my math tests for me and things like that, and selling it to classmates. But so it was always just a kind of a side thing. My family are a bunch of more classical engineers, mechanical, electrical. So that's why I initially went to college for. And I just got to a point, and I think I was a sophomore, by just going into the labs every week and just plugging oscilloscopes in the breadboards and staring at the output and writing it down. I just couldn't do it. It was very, I don't want to say boring, but it was a strain. So I just made the call and switched to computer science just to see what would happen. And then I remember going back to the next lab and actually writing a program. And I just couldn't believe that this was my schoolwork now, what I like to do in my free time. So from then on, it was great.
I want to interject with two questions here. One question being, I remember back on those TI-83s, that I thought the coolest thing in the world was when I had one of my classmates come in with like the classic NES Super Mario game on theirs, and everybody thought it was the coolest thing. Did you program anything that was outside of just like the math stuff?
So I tried to make a couple Snake games, but not to dive too technical so quickly. All those games were written in assembly, which you kind of have to do externally and then load it onto the calculator. Where when you're just on the calculator in class, so I could ignore what's happening in the class, you can write BASIC, the language BASIC, on the calculator and then do more basic things with it.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. I had to know because I remember being so envious of the other kids in class who had the games on their TI-83, and I'm sitting there just like making the little graphs that did shapes and stuff.
Yeah, Block Dude was a staple game.
It sure was. Yeah, I forgot. Sorry, it was not Mario. Then the second question, you said you came from a family of like more classical engineers, mechanical, electrical. What was their opinion from someone like you who started that path and then like did a switch and go to computer science?
So, I mean, they were a little tentative at first because they thought that I was going to be going to school just to, fix Outlook when it's not loading new emails for people and things like that. but now that I'm in there, I mean, they all love how it's turned out.
That's awesome. All right. Sorry. We can roll over to Caleb's part of his story and how he, I guess, went from electrical engineering, which is not a prerequisite to work at Atiba. But yeah, so Caleb, over to you.
Mine's not as tech focused. Mine's more of a story of motivation and meeting people, the people that you know. I've always been told it's the people that you know, and this journey kind of was a lot of that. As Will at Atiba likes to say, it actually wasn't the electrical engineering that I came from. It was a bartender, which still is wrong. I was working in the service industry as a server when I finally came to Atiba. But yeah, for me, I grew up and never really had a solid direction on where I wanted to go. I liked to tinker, engineering. My dad was an electrical engineer, worked on nuclear submarines, and went to the private industry. For me, never really knew what it was, but figured that would be a reasonable choice. I was good with math and science. I was not doing game calculators. I wasn't programming microprocessors, when I was 6, as so many of our talented developers do. But as I got through college, the story is that I just stopped being successful. I didn't know what I was driving towards and had no motivation to finish and ended up not finishing. So I kind of gathered my thoughts and decided that, I had this enjoyment for music and I enjoyed this hardware, electrical engineering things. I did learning about it. So I thought recording engineering might be an interesting path to pursue. And there was a friend that I had met studying abroad in Italy who lived in Nashville. So I had gone to visit him and had loved the city. Loved the idea of it, loved how visible music was and how much of a culture it was. I liked the location of the city. So I made the choice to save up money and just move out to Nashville and see what I could do. So with the goal of getting into recording engineering, I started meeting producers at tables I was waiting on. I got to go visit Curb Studios. But that kind of went on until I'm outside of a place called Brown's Diner. And there was a gentleman who was a key player in my story called Michael Vukovic, who was big into the entrepreneurial scene. I didn't know it at the time. I think he was wearing a leather vest, maybe no shirt underneath. He had a mullet, had started balding up top, a slick back, kind of this rough, raspy voice. And he just starts talking to me, and he gets to know my story a little bit, what I'm doing out there, and very quickly, he must have seen something. I mean, he says, listen, you need to rethink what you're doing here. Let me introduce you to some people. So he puts me in front of a friend of his that's a CTO at a local company. He puts me in front of a woman over at the Entrepreneurial Center who I sit down and talk to. And then he puts me in front of John Wark. Actually, it was through a friend of his that puts me in front of John Wark. His friend sat on the board with Nashville Software School. John Wark was the founder of Nashville Software School. So I go meet with him and decide, you know what? I think this is something I want to give a shot. I started doing some learning online on my own. That's when I started figuring that software is something I do enjoy. I had never seen myself as a developer, but I ended up deciding that software school was for me. And that's where my motivation really shifted and decided this is something I wanted to pursue. So I jumped headfirst and did their full-time 6-month program. And then they stress that after the program, it's a lot of networking to get your first gig. Well, continuing with the people that you know, I had made a friend in the cohort with me who ended up getting a job, and the one previous to me. He was in the one before me. So he graduated early. We kept in touch. He ended up getting a job at Atiba. He put my name in the bucket. JJ gives me a call. I end up getting an interview, and I've been here ever since. Speaking of which, JJ's calling me.
Oh, there you go. He sensed it. That's awesome.
Doesn't he know that we're doing a podcast right now? Well, those are really awesome stories, guys, and it's really cool to hear the background and the differences in the background of how you ended up at Atiba. So as we continue this conversation, I do want to start getting into, what is the junior to senior, which is the topic of this show today. Both of you have, kind of interesting stories on how you got from a junior to senior. What is a junior to senior? So We're going to kind of dig into some of those questions, but I do want to start but just asking the question, what do you guys consider a senior to be in development?
And Greg, why don't you go first? Because I want to hear a little bit about some of the different places that you've worked also. You've bounced around a little bit.
Sure. So a lot of the larger, bigger, stuffier companies, that's seniors just defined by titles, and it's mainly years of experience, things like that. But I think the title that we're talking about, it's more of a a larger term, and to me it just means based on a senior can come onto a project and really see what the clients are looking for, and then with that in mind, then kind of shape how different features or tasks we want to be implemented. Um, if you look on, I've heard through online posts and different things over the years that a classical definition I heard once said that a junior, when they get a task, they just do anything they can to get it done, and then an intermediate developer would know a few different ways to do it, but still just not struggle, but take some time to decide which one they want to do. But then a senior would know, based on the client and the platform, probably they would be able to answer that question. Like, we should do it probably this way. But it's really just getting into a project, and any feature that comes your way, you're pretty comfortable. You most likely have experience or adjacent experience doing something similar in the past, and you can just get right in there.
And what was when you first graduated, Greg, where did you land first? What kind of a firm?
So it was a large Fortune 250. They were in the service industry, and they had a tech department of 800 some people, and everybody's in like pretty discrete buckets and has a big structure hierarchy.
And you also worked for a Fortune 500 firm, and then I think you said a smaller Windows shop, right?
Yeah. So they're pretty similar. We had people came in as juniors, just software developers, and then software engineers, and then software architects was kind of in the past the structure of how things went.
And which position was it where your mindset started changing, where you felt like you had some of the experience you're talking about, where you had more of like a depth of knowledge to apply to solve a problem? Do you remember kind of what part of your career that was?
Yeah, I think it was kind of, I don't know, somewhere maybe 3-ish years in, maybe a little bit more. But it was basically once I started getting assigned tasks, maybe I was assigned it to do on my own at the smaller place, or assigned to, pick out a couple people from my team to assist with it. And I just kind of knew I didn't have to go to external resources to try to figure out how to get something done. I had a kind of a plan in place and could just start tackling it immediately.
Do you think that the size of the firm you were at had anything to do with that? Like at a smaller shop where you have more autonomy and have to solve your own problems, you got further ahead, or at a bigger firm, it was a little more prescribed what needed to be done, or maybe the opposite?
I would say I did benefit from having going to the larger firm first, having that whole stack of experienced people to help out, and try to just dip my feet into an actual professional environment rather than just Googling around trying to figure out how to do things.
Yeah, I can see that.
Well, no, that's awesome, Greg. And so Caleb, I know we've talked about this before, and about your definition of a senior developer, but in your words, what would you consider a senior to be?
Hearing Greg put it the way he is, it's not too far off. My main professional and developer experience has been at Atiba, which is a consulting shop. So it's a unique experience. I'd almost relate it in some sense similar to startups. If anybody listening is involved in a startup company, where the ultimate goal as a developer is to bring value to our customer. I mean, just about anybody in any job, right? You are getting paid to provide some type of value. So actually writing code, the real technical aspects, is just one part of it. So being a senior, as Greg kind of mentioned, I think that seniority shows when you start taking into consideration things outside of just the technical scope of the problem you're trying to solve. So at Atiba, you may be by yourself on a client, you may be with a larger team of people, But ultimately, the goal is to drive value for that client. And sometimes they'll come pitch us a problem and think they have a solution in mind. And I think a less experienced junior would take that and just go do it. Well, you said do this, I did that. Someone, as you gain more experience, will take that into context. We talk about a lot this triangle of needs where you've got a scope, which is a set of work that needs to be done. You've got a timeline in which it needs to be done. You've got the cost, the time and materials that it's going to take and to pay people to do that work and put that effort in. And it's balancing those three things to give the customer something that they value, or your client something of value. So if they're trying to find security, if they're trying to get more market exposure, if they're trying to improve a business process, that's really our ultimate goal. And so the senior experience is not just how well you can scaffold out some program or some application, but it's how well you can derive value in a bigger context for our clients.
I think that's what's really cool about what both of you are saying is that being a senior, at least in the development world, is not about how long you've been doing it. It's about, you know, the knowledge that you've gained, how you've evolved as a developer, and what you've learned, and then how you, like, from a consulting side with Atiba, like how you communicate with clients, how you consult with them, how you listen to their problems, and instead of just doing it, you actually say, you know, there's a better way maybe to do it. So keeping all that in mind, as you guys have grown, as your years of tenure have moved on, how have you seen your core skills grow and evolve? Sorry, I forget we have two of you, so I'll call on you first since we just heard from Caleb. Greg, why don't you kick us off again?
So the core skills as a developer. Well, first thing I'll notice is a lot of the soft skills improve. First of all, so in terms of just things like learning how to read documentation, different resources, you start trying to compile a list. To give an anecdote, when you're given a task, a junior developer might just Google how to do it or try to look up examples of how it was done, whereas a senior would already have a plan kind of in place and might want to look up a specific syntax for whatever language they've been dumped with or things like that. It's a lot of like the hard to define soft skills that improve, mainly, first of all, but then it's definitely in the domains that you're working with. You know caveats. It is just experience. You've worked with languages before. You're just applying what you already learned. And it's also feedback from customers. If you delivered something before, and maybe you got some feedback how they want something to be different, or when you start working with teams as a whole, you start seeing how designers work, and you might try to preempt what they're going to do or work with them to improve UI flows.
Yeah, like see how all the pieces fit together more. And that just comes with experience. I mean, I think, and I also just have been thinking, I know when I have switched jobs in the past, when I've moved around, just seeing how other people address things is so valuable. And, working at a company like Atiba, where we are in a consulting capacity and are working with clients all the time, you still get a lot of that, where you can see how different companies, even, our clients handle different things or approach different things or request different things evenly. So yeah, I can totally relate with that, Greg. But Caleb, let's hear from you. How do you feel like you've kind of leveled up, or like what kind of milestones have happened where your core skills have grown?
I don't know if I could say particular milestones, but the biggest growth I think has been in critical thinking. That's something that I believe strongly in. I remember there was a point in college, we had a friend of ours. We were getting started off in engineering, and she talked a lot about her private school education. It was a lot of memorization, right? She could study her flashcards, she could memorize the facts, and she could regurgitate them on a test. I wasn't so good at that, but I've always felt I was good at tinkering and understanding the essence of what a problem is in order to come up with a solution. I think I was a great test taker, right? Why did they ask this question? What could be the right answer? What are they getting at here? And she was failing at college to understand why the teacher would ask this question that was not from our homework assignments, that was not worded exactly as it had been spelled out in the textbook. And I see some developers that come in and they say, well, I've read the docs and they have these examples, but I can't find an example that fits my use case. Or I have this framework that works this way, but it doesn't match what I need it to do. And now I'm lost and I'm stuck. There was a project I was on and they brought in a developer, an outside contractor, and he asked us, he posed this question where he said, you've got a situation and there's two solutions. You got solution A and you got solution B, and solution A is not viable. You can't use it for whatever reason. But neither is solution B. So when you come to a point when neither of your solutions work, what do you do? And you can throw up your hands, but the answer that he gave is you find solution C. And so that's where I think I've seen myself, even with my team members, with the different clients, they've gotten to a point where they get stuck. And I may not know their framework. I may not know their business the best. I may not know exactly what they're working on. But for me, where I think I've been developing my skills and becoming valuable is being able to look at what their problem is and help them think of something they haven't considered. And that's where I think I've grown the most is, you're familiar with this stack. Let me pull from this other client project and tell you about their solution. And maybe you can use that to find another answer. And that's where I think I've seen the most growth, is being able to share that with other people to help make them successful in their solutions.
Greg, do you have something to add?
Yeah, just when you put the question in terms of milestones, it just made me think that it wasn't a hard thing that just snapped and happened one day. But now that I think back, I think one of the largest things for me was just overcoming the imposter syndrome that a lot of juniors will immediately encounter, which is basically just this sense of dread that they're not going to be able to complete something, or maybe they weren't as ready as they thought they were. Quickly, as a quick anecdote, you might have heard me say it before, this story, but because it's completely true, my very first assignment in a real career outside of school was to debug a stored procedure coming from a database. And when you're in school, you're taught SQL is just select from where. It might be 8 little nice lines, and you get all your data. But my very first assignment was to look at this stored procedure, and it was 2,000 lines of a dynamic query, so no syntax highlighting or anything. And I just stared at that probably for a whole afternoon and just started panicking. Like, there's no way I'm going to be able to parse through all this. But just over the years, now I'm noticing that no matter what task is given, there's no real sense of panic. I know a big thing to do is just to take a feature or task, whatever it may be, and you can easily break it down into discrete steps that need to be tackled in order to complete it. And there's no sense of, oh man, I don't know if I can do this. But we're going to get it done.
I love hearing that. That's so applicable for other careers, not even just in technology, like a step-by-step approach, like what's the next best thing that I can do right now to solve this problem, and kind of chip away at it.
Yeah. And I want to just reiterate to people who may not listen to every single episode, Joey here, I'm not an overly technical person. I'm on the business development side of Atiba. And so, all I see a lot on the software development side, I see a lot of different languages, a lot of different names. And then I see new languages that are being asked about that I've never heard before. So one of the things I wonder from a developer perspective, where you guys, you may have an area of study that you studied a couple of languages that were relevant 7 years ago, Caleb, when you were in Nashville Software School, but what they're teaching now may not be anywhere near what you learned. So how do you stay relevant as your career progresses once you get out of school? And Caleb, I'm asking you first on this one.
Yeah, staying relevant is important. Internally with our team leads, we talk a lot about technology. So in particular with greenfield projects, we've been given a blank slate on what we want to build this solution in. And that could be picking a language, a framework, an architecture, a hosting environment, a cloud solution. And there's a lot of options out there. And so we spend a lot of time trying to figure out whether, even staying relevant is important. For example, staying with the latest and greatest has risks, right? There's not as much support. There's new languages and frameworks are not as well tested. I've got a project right now where they're using a framework and they just went through a big update and they're requiring everybody to do this big migration in the next year or two. And it's caused significant headaches for our project. And they've had to halt feature development to bring this code through this migration to stay relevant with this framework. But that being said, that's kind of how I stay relevant. Is there are some times where we need to pick a new project and we have to go find out what's out there, what's available. Some technologies that were relevant before are no longer an option. I can't build this and deploy this. The clients that come to us, we never know what we're going to get when they come through that door. So that's a very unique way, being in a consulting firm, that I get exposure to a lot of different things and a lot of different environments and tools and frameworks. So I will take the time to read up on it. So as far as how I can stay relevant and how I would suggest people staying relevant is pay attention to it. Look at when you see the what's new features added, when you see upcoming features that are being added to frameworks or tools, read those notes. Read the release notes, follow up on forums and see what people are using, see what's popular, and go spend some time reading about it. There is another developer who's unfortunately no longer with us, we were doing a React.js project. It's a front-end JavaScript framework, and he always seemed to know the next thing that had just came out. And I'm like, this is a new feature that they just released. We haven't even upgraded. We're like 2 major versions behind. How do you know what this is? And he said, well, I see when they release new features and I'll spend an hour or so and spin up a little Scratch project and just play with it. So if it's a new cloud environment, spin up a project, go tinker with it, go toy with it. If it's a new language, go do a tutorial, do a hello world. If it's a new framework, spin up a project, scaffold something, go read through the source code, go test it out and get your hands on it. And even if you aren't successful or get anywhere with it, just becoming familiar and getting visibility on it is a great way to at least be able to know what's out there.
That's great advice. I love that.
Yeah. And Greg, what's your thought?
Yeah, so with staying relevant, there's, as Caleb was mentioning, I feel like there's a few different scenarios. There's the out of necessity. Say if you're making a mobile app and iPhone updates, it's no longer going to support the version you targeted, and now your whole app won't compile. So then you're forced to stay relevant and learn the new things. Along those lines, I like to try to preempt the necessity. In one of our current projects, it's on iPhone or iOS. It was mainly written in Objective-C, and now all of our new features going forward will hopefully be all in Swift UI, if Caleb lets me. And then, when I was working for big, larger companies where things move at a much slower pace, they still had components on the mainframe. And in order to modernize that, they had to hire entire new teams, rebuild everything, and it's a Herculean task to do all that. So it's good to try to stay ahead of the curve before you're forced into upgrading something.
I'll just add. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to add one thing that is so unfortunate. You talk about necessity and getting outdated. One thing that kills me to see is when clients come to us and they've let things go too long. So, browsers get updated. So users are running web applications in new environments. If you're using hosted servers, those go through updates. Databases go through updates, security patches. If you don't keep your code up to date, you could ruin the ability for that application to be updated. Now, anything can be done with any amount of time, but if you don't keep your projects relevant and up to date, then eventually it could get to the point where updating them and bringing them up to relevancy is so time consuming and so expensive that the business may choose to abandon it altogether. And I've seen it happen, and it kills me to see it, because all I can think is if they would have just kept up with this, they would have gotten ahead of this, Greg, as you were saying, then they could still have this tool and product available to them today.
Yeah, I can as a project manager here, I can speak to that also. The ongoing maintenance and updates is such a critical piece to like a new build. There's the build piece first, but then right away we roll into this like support and maintenance role where we're just constantly looking for updates and modifications, more so than just like break fix, looking forward and trying to future proof whatever it is we just spent all this time and money developing. So, yes.
I guess my final thoughts would be that, in my free time, I also try to pull the latest and greatest, toy around with it, see if I could bring anything to our clients, anything of value. And I'm also planning on the nuclear option, which is planning to go to grad school.
And what would the degree in grad school be?
Machine learning, or one of its adjacent fields.
Oh, that's so cool. Gosh, we could do a whole other podcast on like what's next, thinking through, the next iteration of this.
Yeah, and then that would be irrelevant here in like what, a year because of how quickly the tech is changing.
Yeah, seriously. I'll move into some lessons learned. You guys have already been talking about some of the projects you've been working on, but I did want to spend a little time talking about what happens when a project doesn't go as expected. And just everyone's been involved in a program like that. Not necessarily like a big fail, but when something happens that wasn't anticipated and how you pivot from there. And I'd love to hear just kind of how you handled that and also what you learned. And I think everyone would agree sometimes the fails are where you learn the most and will help with the next project. So Caleb, you want to kick that one off?
Yeah, I'd been reflecting on that this morning. And of course, I'm not remembering what I had been reflecting on.
Oh, great.
But there's a couple of projects that come to mind, and I would say they weren't successful. There's all sorts of ways that we could call it a failure, but ultimately it was not successful for the client. A couple of examples are, one I have in mind is we picked an overly complex architecture. So we saw this grand scheme, and I've seen this in a couple other projects where we imagine the client comes to you and they say, we're gonna have the next big thing, and this needs to be able to scale out, it needs to be able to scale up, and we need to have all these features, but we're going to add features later. So we need to have a framework that we can build onto, and we can, do all of these things, and it's very exciting. And, developers and architects are sitting there putting this all together, and they've got this amazing solution. It's going to have all the coolest things and all the coolest solutions. And one project, it was a neat multiple layers of software layers. So different API layers, there's different business logic layers. Well, that got handed off to another developer that couldn't maintain it. And it ended up not being able to move features, and the project slowly ground to a halt and was abandoned. There's another client that I'm thinking of where same thing, and this wasn't one that this is one we've inherited, and we work with them today, but they came and they had a technical leadership in their company who brought on a firm to build the next big thing, and they wanted all the words. In this case, it had a lot to do with hosting. We want serverless, we want containers, we want Kubernetes, we want highly scalable, auto scaling up and down and all around. And they gave them that. And it's microservices and highly distributed. They've got, hundreds of repos for all of their different endpoints and microservices. Very complex distributed architecture. It also is about 4 to 5 times more expensive than their existing legacy application that they're trying to replace. So the lessons learned are really, try not to get ahead of yourself. And in this case, it was, we made things way too complex, way too fast. And so as we've been reflecting on that, we're now looking at new clients and new problems and going, what is most important in these scenarios for us as a company? And that's, like we talked about being a senior, is bringing value, but how quickly can we bring value to you? I don't know how long your budget you have. Some of these people have limited budget. Some of these people have these grandiose visions that may or may not bring value. And so how can we bring value to you as quickly as possible? So before we start building this grandiose thing that we take a year or 2 or more to build, and you've invested millions of dollars in and are continuing to fight to get it out the door, how can we spin up one page for you? How can we spin up a mobile app with a quick login and a dashboard, right? And build from there so that we can start bringing value faster.
Got it. Yep. That's great advice. Greg, I'll flip the question to you too. And it could be a project that maybe didn't go as expected or one that went really well. Any lessons learned from either side of it? What comes to mind for you?
Yeah, I mean, Caleb nailed what I would consider like the macro of the stuff. Thinking things a little more on the micro. When you're from purely development, it's kind of difficult to consider anything as a pure failure, because everything you've probably was working with new language features, or like I have yet to work on a project where I wasn't forced to learn something new. So it's hard. So even if that project, from the product owner's point of view, if they consider it a flunk, the developer still gained experience, and they can take that all moving forward. So when you're just a pure developer and if you're not associated with clients, particularly if you're thinking at the larger corporations, it's hard to think that you personally failed or your team, because you could always, on the next project, take that experience along with you. The biggest thing that I think most developers can relate to probably is missing estimates, or time constraints and things like that. And that's just a continual process. And, as soon as you fail, I think developers have a tendency to be too optimistic with their estimates. So, a big thing for me was just, get to my estimate in the beginning when I was starting to learn how to do estimations. It was come up to a number and then almost double it, maybe add 1.5 to it. So little things along those lines.
I like to just add to that. The word failure kind of rubs me, and I agree 100% with Greg, because there's always experience gained in every situation. So whether it was not successful in giving the client or customer what they needed, then we did not meet expectations. We were not successful in meeting expectations. And everything that we do is all about managing expectations. Like Greg talked about estimating, one of the hardest thing any developer will tell you that they have to do is setting those expectations, managing them and meeting them all along the way, and being able to adjust as quickly as possible when you're off track from meeting those expectations. And when you can manage those throughout a project, it may look completely different from start to finish, right? You may end up with something you never envisioned, but as long as you are communicating with your end users, your clients, your customers, and managing those expectations along the way, you can prevent being unsuccessful, because no matter what you end up with, if that's where you expected to be, then you will always be successful.
Totally. That really speaks to the value of communication too. Active, open communication that's continuous and ongoing. Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, really, failure. It depends on how do you define success and how do you define failure. I mean, those are good conversations to have at the start of any project, and something you should have from a planning perspective. So let's move into any advice you guys would have for juniors or people who are kind of maybe more starting off their career. Maybe you got a piece of advice that really stuck with you over the years. I know a few things pop to mind for me when I think about that. Or maybe it's just kind of, overall lessons learned. And we've hit on a few things already, but Greg, I'll kick it to you. What's like, if you had to boil down one or two nuggets for someone just starting out, what would you say?
Yeah, first starting out, I would say, so going back to the imposter syndrome, I would say when you're actually on a team and you're in the field and working, to not be worried about reaching out and asking for assistance or advice or direction right off the get-go. I think a lot of time, like when I first came into the field, I spent a lot of time just trying to figure out something, worried that a senior might think I'm not up to snuff or whatever it may be. When really, it turns out, I ended up asking, and then there was domain-specific answers that applied only to that project that I would have figured out on my own. So the seniors are there to help and to get you over the hump. And I think particularly that's a difficult thing to do, is to ask those initial questions, because when you're learning, particularly if you're self-learning, you want to prevent yourself from just looking up the answers all the time, because all the answers you could be doing on any beginner project is there on the internet, on Stack Overflow, whatever it may be. But you're hurting yourself by looking for it there instead of just trying to grind through and learn it yourself. But when you're actually out there in the field and working, you're on a team, you need to be asking those questions to get up to speed.
Yeah, totally. And there's probably kind of a double-edged sword because you should try to figure it out on your own first if you can. But then at some point, put that imposter syndrome to the side and like ask for help if you need it.
Right. And then with a little more experience, then you'll recognize a question as something, you should be able to figure out. Or if it's something, I don't know the routes for this API call. Like I need somebody who made the routes and ask them.
Yeah. Caleb, what would you say?
I think the biggest one for me was actually an internship my sophomore year of college. And I was going into this big presentation and they said, don't be afraid to say, I don't know. And when you say, I don't know, say you can find out and you will follow up with them. So it's almost like a safety net for the imposter syndrome. Because my next piece of advice is throw yourself out there into uncomfortable situations. I was just asked for a new project, and that's probably what JJ was calling about earlier. And it's not my field, but it's comfortable enough that I can go in and at least know that I can say, I don't know, and then I can go research and find out answers. So put yourself in uncomfortable situations, surround yourself with smart people, talk to them, learn from them, use them, as Greg was mentioning, and don't be afraid to go into something you're uncomfortable and say, I don't know, but I'm happy to get more information. I'm happy to go find out. I don't know right now, but I will get an answer for you. I can follow up after this call, after this chat, after this email, and then do that, obviously.
On that, Caleb, and some people may hear that and say, well, I've heard that before. And I've heard it before. I've told people that before. The problem with that is that people will say it and hear it, but they won't actually do it. Because I think it goes back to that imposter syndrome that if someone asks you a question, you want to know the answer, and you may know bits and pieces of the answer. But then when you start spouting off, it kind of seems just not as genuine as if you just said, you know what, I don't know, or I don't have all the details. I know a little bit, but let me go figure out everything that I can, and I'll get back to you. And then, of course, like you said, getting back is of the utmost importance to actually follow through on your word. But I just wanted to point that out there that although I'm sure people have heard that before, I don't feel like people always execute. They just hear it and then let it go. But yeah.
So I will, for those juniors that are or maybe listening to this, if you go into an interview, you absolutely do not want to spout off on something you don't know about it. I had an interview recently with someone that was more junior, and they said they had a lot of cloud experience. Well, in my experience at Atiba, I've spent a lot of time working with AWS, with Azure, with Google Cloud, playing this DevOps role for a lot of our projects. I don't know if I'd say I'm an expert, but I'm definitely not unfamiliar. Well, they started spouting off about how they did this and did that, and I kept asking them questions and kept getting unsatisfactory answers, and it was very quickly a turnoff that showed me that they were not experienced to tell me that they actually didn't know what they were talking about, or that they didn't know that they didn't know. And that was a flag to me in the interview. I would have much preferred them to say, this is exactly what I did. This is what my role was. And I don't know about those other things, but I'd like to if I had an opportunity. So you really need to be conscious of that in interviews. No one's looking to see whether you have all the answers. They're looking to see if you know your limitations.
Yeah, I think, I'm a parent. I've got 3 kids. Caleb, I know you're soon to be a parent. That's one thing I've learned with kids is that just like with your interview with a junior, like I know when my kids are lying to me, but I'll keep asking questions. Like they don't know that I know they're lying. But at the end of it all, it's like, listen, I know that you don't know all those things that you just said you know. And I know that you guys are the ones that flushed that down the toilet when you said you didn't. But anyway, so it's very parallel there. But Greg, did you have something you wanted to add to that?
Just a quick anecdote. I was in an interview once, and the interviewer asked me to write, if I could write a for loop that could just add numbers 1 through 10. And I kind of looked at her incredulously, and she just said, you have no idea how many people just lie about being developers. And I said, oh, okay. But then once I was in the actual interview and they needed to know that a follow-up interview, and then they started asking specific things. So yeah, as Caleb was saying, definitely only say what you actually know.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I love that little piece right there of all the advice, and kind of on the same path there is, and that this is what we're going to wrap up on. Are there any resources maybe for some juniors stepping into the world that you guys could recommend? Looking back, is like, hey, I wish I'd have known about this, or hey, there's this tool out there that has, is out now that you would recommend to people. Caleb, do you have anything?
For me, I've seen academic and boot camp students. I'm not selling Nashville Software School, but if you want to get into professional development, I feel strongly that these boot camps provide you an level of exposure to real world experiences that are much closer to what you would face walking in the door as a software developer than I've heard some of our academic experiences. Or even if you have it, that's a great way to get that exposure. But even if you don't do that, I don't have anything specific online, but what I always tell people where I've seen the most growth and most experience for me was having a tangible project to work on. So whether this is building a website, whether this is building out a web application, setting up an e-commerce store, spinning up a web server and configuring it, do something real and tangible. You can only make so many to-do lists before you run out of options. There's only so many code camps that run through for loops and case structures. Get involved with something with real purpose and meaning, with a real project. That's where you will have the most growth, running into unexpected situations, having to think critically. So go find that. Get involved with meetups or volunteers and local community groups. There's usually lots of opportunities in those to get plugged in.
Greg, how about you?
Yeah, so as Caleb was saying, in terms of starting a project, I see online a lot. Someone will say, I've been learning web dev for two months now. When should I start trying to make my first project? It's like yesterday. Like, you should immediately start trying to make a project. You don't know what you don't know until you fail there and need to learn it. But for some concrete resources, if you're not a social butterfly like Caleb and you're off the grid like myself, I use there's a subreddit on Reddit called Learn Programming. I'll have to plug that just because I'm not affiliated, but I'm there quite frequently. And if you go into their FAQ section, it's probably one of the best compiled lists of learning resources for computer science on the internet. And it stems out to like the MOOC courses, the massively open source learning things. They could give you tons of flowcharts and processes, and it'll say, how to be a web dev, how to be a mobile dev, and it just give you the whole workflow from day one to the end. And then its sister subreddit is called CS Career Questions, and that'll help you whether you're coming from school, a formal school or education, or a boot camp.
That's great. We'll drop those in the show notes so we've got them.
So I had a quick thought. So Atiba started a program a number of years ago. There's a local organization called Hands On Nashville. I think they're pretty local, especially with the hands-on part. So it's much more focused on putting together volunteers and matching them with those that need volunteers to help them. There's a subset that Atiba's helped put them together called Geek Cause, which is people that need technology assistance, software development assistance, and they may not have the budget, or they may be a nonprofit that they don't have the internal resources to do this. So if you're looking for some way to get involved with the way that we can work remote these days, go check out Geek Cause. And Anna Kate, Joey, I think we can share that link, hon.org/Geek Cause. And look for an opportunity there to get plugged in. If you're looking for a project, a way to get involved with something real, they may have opportunities available.
Yeah, no, that's great. And thank you for pointing that out. I was about to, as soon as you dropped that link over in the chat, but yeah, we'll definitely add that into our show notes and send it out for you guys too. But it would be good for whether you work at Atiba or not. If you're a junior out there, if you're in Nashville Software School, it is a great way to kind of take what Greg said, like start the project yesterday, just get going on it and move on. So, and having said that, Caleb, Greg, I know you both are super busy with all the work you're doing at Atiba. So we just want a huge thank you to taking time out of your day to talk and to encourage some juniors out there that may need that encouragement. you don't have to have all the answers. You can just learn along the way and make mistakes and go from there. And feel free to say, I don't know. But so thank you, Caleb. Thank you, Greg. And then thank you, everybody, for listening. And we will catch you on the next episode.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Joey.
Thanks,
everyone.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Half Geek Half Human podcast. Make sure to follow the Half Geek Half Human podcast on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. We'll see you next time.
You've been listening to Half Geek Half Human.